Hi-ho! Hi, guys. Welcome to episode 86. All right, guys, so you're back with another one. Again, I'm always finding great guests, and, I always said that I was, fascinated about, sitcoms back in, even in the 90s to on down, where they had, these, one-off episodes. Not that this has to be a one-off topic, but where they just would randomly do a special where it wasn't as funny as it needed to be. It was more about the subject matter, whether it was AIDS or cancer or whatever subject matter was about, racial relations and things like that. And so I like to delve into different topics from time to time that isn't the norm, not just another person with a disability. So we're going to delve into a topic we have yet to cover. But first, let's introduce our first guest. Why don't you say your name and obviously a little about yourself?
Hello, greetings. Thank you for having me. My name is Joy Fisher Griffin. I'm an educator, a passionate adoption advocate, and that really just began advocating for adoptees' rights and adoptive and foster families over the past 4 years. I love the arts. After going through my own struggles as an adoptee, I wrote my memoir, Finding Joy, A True Story of Faith, Family, and Love, that came out in 2019. I shared the story of how everyone could help other people who sit in silence about their struggles. And I wanted to find ways to be open about adoption. And I think if we begin to have some of those conversations about adoption and adoptive and foster families and bring that to the surface, we might be able to help some members of those families find their community, their safe space to have conversations.
Right.
I'm also an author of two children's books that just came out, Choosing Joy, An Adoptee's Journey and Finding Belonging, and Singing with Joy. There are lots of different ways to be a family. Our young people can talk about many things, from social media to what's on TV, and why can't we just jump in and get them started using language that's sensitive for folks that are in the adopted and foster families.
Right. So I guess we take it from the beginning. When were you adopted as an infant?
I was adopted as an infant, and I think I was 2 months, and I would say around the 4 years old was the earliest I recall having conversations about being adopted. I just remember my mother using stories and at nighttime having conversations about my birth mother not being able to care for me, and that she wanted someone or family to be able to help raise me the way that she couldn't. And that's kind of how the stories always started. And it would spin off into some other things, which is why writing children's books were important to me, because I wanted to have something where you can start the conversation. But it was always something that I knew, but not something that we ever really talked about at home.
How did you know? Were they like a different race or
No, I'm a Black child raised in a Black family.
Okay.
Other people would have a hint that maybe I wasn't theirs. I look similar to my mother with the same complexion, but my father is of darker skin, and we don't look alike. So
Gotcha.
When I was with him, there would be times where people would say, "Oh, well, she must look like her mother."
Right.
Some people do it jokingly. Some people sound like they're questioning him.
Probably more about infidelity, not necessarily adopting.
Something crazy.
Right.
So as a child, you have to think as the parent, well, how am I going to respond to that? So at times he would respond, yes, she's adopted. At times he would take that person to the side and say, oh, yes, she is adopted. At other times he would say, yes, she does look like her mother. So it really depended on, I guess, however he chose to answer it. But on many of those occasions, the yes, she's adopted sometimes took place still within earshot. I could hear the conversation, but it wasn't always done right in front of me. So I think over time, that's when I began to wonder, okay, can we talk about this or can't we talk about this?
Right.
They've never said you can't, but it was never anything that really brought it to the floor to have those family conversations about, until I would say I got into maybe high school or college, when the legislation was getting ready to change in our state. And, they were sharing in the news what the pros and the cons were for changing the law, so that adoptees with closed records could then gain access to their records. So there were a lot of battles in the courts, battles on the media, And anytime something was in the newspaper, both of my parents, and I say parents as in my adopted parents, both of them would cut the articles out and make sure that I read it. And that would kind of spark the conversation about being adopted and what that meant to me. And although they never said, well, do you want to look for your birth parents? I think they always knew that I did. So they always, anytime came out in the newspaper or was on the news, they would call me into the room and then we talk about it then.
Right. In hindsight, did you think them telling you at that that young of an age, was that the right time to tell you at 4 years
I think
old?
it was. I think it was, because then it wasn't something that someone else could then come back and tell me where they didn't tell me. I know my mother struggled with that, and I didn't find out about that until I actually took her to one of my support groups just a few years ago. And one of the guys who's in our support group was a late discovery adoptee, meaning he didn't find out he was adopted until he was 65.
Right.
And that was at a family event where somebody just kind of spilled it out on the table. And she said to him, she said, I always struggle with wondering if I should have told her as early as I did, or if I should have just kept it to myself. And he said to her, no, I think the best thing you did was let her know. He said, because for me, as a late discovery adoptee, he said, I just constantly struggled because I didn't feel like I fit in. And it seemed like everybody else around me knew something about the situation except for me. He said, so I would hear rumors, but nobody would ever confirm anything. So you hear mixed opinions. You hear different things from different adoptees. Everybody's journey is different. But I do think they did the right thing.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think you hear a lot of teenagers. I know a guy I work with, I'm really close with. His daughter, he calls him his daughter, but it's really not his. He has two sons by the same woman, but she's not his, and she was told at a later age, and the relationship kind of got torn afterwards. Now, I know they weren't adopted, but, she thought, he took care of her as when she was a young infant, and, forever she thought that was her dad, and come to find out biologically he wasn't, and she, kind of started acting out and doing a lot of teenage girl stupid things. And so, maybe it is good to tell them early on. So you still...
And that's one of the things, too, because then the kids begin to go back and question everything that you've told them over their lifetime when you kind of wait. Well, were they telling the truth when they said this? Were they telling the truth when they said that? Do they really mean? And then you're battling against all the things that now the child is running through their mind of things that the parents have said over the years, and they begin to question, your honesty and your character and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I just always, the only reason I would wonder is just because when you're that young, you don't really fully understand a lot of things, especially at 4.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why, even though it didn't come up in regular, like I said, it wasn't a regular conversation piece, as things that were age appropriate. She told me that little story when I was 4, and that was a story that she repeated for quite some time. And I think over time with the media and everything else, you really begin to understand what being adopted means, even if there's not a lot of conversation about it. But then you're familiar with the word. It's not a shock to you or anything.
Right. I believe I heard you still call them mom and dad?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, up until when, and I'm sure you had your, pushback and certain feelings towards it, just wanting to know who your mom and dad are, but you were really well taken care of and well treated?
Yeah, I had a very good life. There's nothing that I would complain or take away. I think my parents did a wonderful job, my adopted parents, that is. And it's been a blessing truly to have now my birth parents have gotten a chance to meet my adopted parents.
Oh, wow.
And even just to see them say thank you and show their appreciation to my adopted parents for how they raised me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, again, you're an advocate for it, and it's great, but, you hear a lot of horror stories, and, sometimes people do find their right parents that will take care of them, but then they had to go through a couple bad ones. But with you landed in the right place, which is, super fortunate.
Absolutely. And I think that if you're talking in terms of folks who are going through many foster families and being bounced around, that's something that, every state I know is beginning to take a look at. And I think through the pandemic, one of the things I was just reading recently was about how states are now beginning to start looking for relatives within the family to adopt kids before they send them out to to have them relinquished to other people in the community. They are asking family members to take on the children of their loved ones to kind of keep the child in the family.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, I don't know a whole lot about it, but when someone goes through a bad experience, whether any physical violence, molestation, or anything in these homes that end up being bad, how do they, is there a way that they can kind of mark them down? You know how, it's a bad example, but, like with pedophiles, they have like a dot where it's like, we can't go in that house. Is there a way that they can kind of be marked down as a bad family to go to, or do they just kind of get passed around and maybe they'll get another family?
Absolutely. I think a big part of that is when they find out. So sometimes if children are going through different homes or group homes, and if they're not reporting different things, then it makes it more difficult to identify the good ones and the bad ones. Mm. But I believe that I know for us as a school, when we hear that any of our young people in group homes or foster homes, if they're having any issues, we have a duty to report that.
Right.
So I know that's just as it relates to being an educator, period. So there is a duty to report those kind of things. And there are records that are taken, whether you call it Division of Children Protective Services or Division of Family Youth and Services, whatever it is in each state, there is an organization that keeps track of people, group homes, foster homes, just even regular individuals that.
Right. I'm sure that's gotten better.
Cause harm for children.
I'm sure that's gotten better over time too, right? Because you hear a lot of horror stories, but I'm not saying they still don't happen, but I think you hear less of them than you used to, because I don't think there was much research. I think just anybody could probably just adopt somebody, but now there's so much more care into it and more awareness.
There's home studies. There's folks that come out into your house. They check your background. There's a lot of front end work that's done before even a child is placed in your home, whether that's through foster care or through adoption. There's a lot of checks and balances that agencies have put in place to ensure the safety of children.
Yeah, and you always I think the more awareness that goes to certain subject matter, even just like what we talked earlier about, just mental health, you hear a lot of these horror stories or just these people that these kids that go through these homes and they're still wanting to know who their parents are, and they have this feeling of resentment or just anger of why did my family give up on me? And if you don't address these things like mental health at an early age, then that's how it kind of gets worse. And so I'm sure with the information that comes out with a lot of these subject matters, it probably helps with what you're advocating for, because especially young ages like that, they're so fragile, and the more information that's headed that way, and then the more people that know what they're doing and not just putting anybody at any job, I'm sure it's probably an easier way of getting these kids into a better home.
Yeah, and a big piece of that, a lot of states are taking what's called a trauma-informed way of working with children, realizing that children that are coming in, if you're talking about homes that have been troubled, how do we then work with them? How do we then support them? How do we get them the counseling that they need? And then how do you work with the educators who see them on a day-to-day basis? So a big part of that is really educating. If Johnny is cutting up in class, it's not necessarily because he's a really bad kid. You don't know what went on at the home prior, or you don't know if he just moved from one home to another home. So we're trying to, and many states are trying to train educators, case managers, counselors, social workers, so that they can be aware and attentive to those types of behaviors that isn't about somebody just being bad, but there may be some underlying, issues that need to be addressed as well.
Right. As you were talking about before, just wanting to come out about being adopted, is that label on a kid, is that still kind of give you a bad taste in your mouth, as far as when people hear the word oh, that kid's adopted, it's well, that's probably why he's acting out or whatever? Is that still kind of a label that kind of affects some of these kids?
I think it does. I think we hear adoption, you automatically go somebody gave them up, or maybe the mother was a little loose, and or maybe she was raped. So all those storylines that we hear sometimes in the media
Yeah.
just start running through people's minds without any facts or without any information. You just hear adopted, and there must have been something wrong, and sometimes that stigma creates a certain shame and embarrassment in the adoptee, the adoptive parent, and the birth parent in terms of even just feeling open and comfortable enough to say that their child is adopted, or even that they're interested in adopting. Because so many people, and I think the media has gotten a lot better in terms of storylines that we see as it relates to adoption on television.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things when I was growing up was about the crazy adoptee who was going to go after and attack their, if they found their birth parent, they were going to try to do something to them,
Yeah.
or just some kind of off the hook storyline that just was not positive. And I think the media has finally begun to have some more positive storylines that can change even the child's perspective on their adoption situation.
Right. Yeah, because if you think about it, even if someone did like the most basic, homework on, hey, like in your case, I was an infant. And it's like, even if my parents were crappy, you can't say I was crappy or because they gave me up because I was crazy. I was, 4 months old, 2 months old. So if you do just basic homework on where, and again, there are some kids that really were bad and they got put into homes and so on, but, I don't think that's the norm. So, yeah, I'm sure people just did basic research on, hey, okay, yeah, my background is I was adopted as an infant. Yeah, it's not because of me.
And a lot of us as the adoptee, sometimes it's it's more difficult to think of it that loosely because our first thought is if one, how can we be lovable? Who's going to want us if our birth mother didn't even want us? So those are some of the struggles that we face. Those are, um, issues of abandonment, issues with identity because you don't really know where you come from, issues with just loss and grief and fears of people leaving you.
Right.
And even though I was adopted as a child, all those things still exist. All those things are a part of trauma. My birth started with a loss, and it started with a loss of me losing my birth mother. Yes, she gained an adoptive parent or adoptive family, but there's still a loss there. One of the situations that this gentleman, he described it, he said, okay, you're dating somebody and you're dating them for about 7 or 8 months. And it's time you decide that you're going to get married kind of quickly, but you're going to go ahead and get married. He said, so you get to the ceremony, you're ready to get married, and somebody new is standing right there at the 8th or 9th month of your relationship. It's a change. Even in vitro, even in the womb, we know that we ask women to talk to their children, to play music. There's a reason that they ask you to do all that stuff. It's a part of brain development and all the body development and things of that nature. So if you saw somebody new on the 8th or 9th month, that's going to create a loss for you as well. So we try to paint it in a way so that people can understand that even if you're adopted at birth, there's still going to be a sense of grief. There's still going to be some loss that we have to deal with over the years.
Right. When did you actually really want to reach out to your family? Like, because I'm sure for a while you probably struggled with it, and I'm sure there's you don't want to upset the family that brought you up in this world and loves you, but you also have this kind of itch that you need to scratch.
Yeah, that's always been a struggle, because you're looking around the world and in most families, biological families, you see family resemblance. So as an adoptee, you don't see that. I didn't have cousins where I went down the street and they say, oh, you must be such and such a cousin. Didn't have those kind of experiences. So I think finding someone who looked like me, who could explain my quirks, all the weird little things about me, that was going to help make sense for me. So it's something I always wanted to do. But it just seemed like, you graduate from high school, now you're going off to college. Okay, so now isn't the time, focus on college. You graduate from college and I, got married, had my first child. And so it just never seemed to be the right time. And I decided when my middle daughter was I took her on her college tour, she had an overnight event. and 23andMe commercial popped up. She was on campus. I was in the hotel, and they were talking about how you could get your medical records if you send in this saliva, and they would assess it, and then you could find out some of your roots. And it was at that moment that I decided this is my second daughter going off to college. I had one at home. Maybe this is the time to do this. And I took my last couple little dollars and ordered a kit and said, okay, let's do this. Let's see what happens. I've always said I needed time. I also needed to be in the right headspace because I knew that I couldn't get through, that this was going to be a lot emotionally, and that I thought I was in a better place to be able to do it at that time. So then I sent the kid in, got a few hits. That took a few months to get back, but got a few hits. Got a hit from a first or second cousin. Got a hit from a third and a fourth cousin. Once I mentioned the adopted piece, after I messaged them for a little bit, got them talking a little bit, and then sent them a message and said, oh, by the way, I'm adopted. I'm trying to, after that, cricket. I didn't hear anything else from anybody. So I said, okay, let me try the other DNA website and see if I get any hits over there. Same thing. We got a first and second cousins, a ton of fifth through eighth cousins, but reached out to those that were closer, the first, second, and third cousin area. And one of them in particular, she had like close to over 2,000 people on her family tree. So I said, she would probably talk to me. So I reached out to her and didn't mention adoption at all. Just kind of asked her about genealogy. She loved doing it, shared a little bit about what she had learned over her family over time. And then I finally dropped the adoption bomb on her and said, by the way, I'm adopted. This is the year that I was born. This is the city and state that I was born in. And she began to comb, and this is the age that I think my birth parents are. So she began to comb through her family tree to see if we had a relative that matched that age who would have been that area. Because, again, she had over 2,000 folks there. But we weren't able to find anybody. So a year and a half later, I tell her, and she and I had been talking for that whole year and a half. I said, well, I'm not sure when the legislation was going to be finalized, but I'm here in January. I said, so once January is finalized, I plan to apply for my original birth certificate. If I get it, and if my birth mother does not redact her name off of it, I should have a name to give to you so that we can match it up. So we had a couple more months to wait, and then first couple of weeks in January, she reached out. Did you get the name yet? And I said, no, I didn't get the name yet. And then that's when I realized the legislation announcement that was going to be done by the press was 2 days later. So I decided to go to that. And a few weeks later, after that happened, I was able to get my original birth certificate. It had my birth mother's name on it. I sent it to that cousin that I found on the DNA website, and the name was nowhere in sight on, and not even anything that closely matched. And so then we realized, well, maybe we're related on my birth father's side, but then we still had to figure out how to get some information from my birth mother. So between social media, Google, we were able to find my birth mother, popped in her name in Google, popped in her name in Facebook, up popped her picture. And I started writing letters, and I wrote letters to her, sent her messages on Facebook, and just asking her to reach out to me. And she hadn't reached out for quite some time. And then my cousin and my oldest daughter said, oh, just go to her church, because at that point we found a lot of information about her on Facebook. And I said, I can't just show up at her church. But before I knew it, she responded to me on Facebook. And that began the beginning of the conversation and the beginning of the relationship. And once she solidified that I was who I said I was, and in my letter to her, I wrote my birth name, and a birth name was on the birth certificate. Only she would know that. And so she confirmed who I was and then gave me my birth father's name. I then gave that birth father's name to the cousin on 23andMe, not 23andMe, on Ancestry. And she called me immediately and said that's my first cousin. And so before I knew it, in one day, the end of January, I was talking to my birth mother and my birth father at the same time.
Wow. Were they weren't together anymore?
No, they weren't together. They hadn't been together since I was born. Since I was born. They did go to college together. And She ended up graduating 1 year. She graduated the year after, but they had not been in communication until I came back into their lives.
Right. What was the conversations like? Were they happy conversations? Was it awkward?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all starts off kind of awkward because you don't really know. I think my birth father, when my cousin, I told my cousin I couldn't call my birth father because I just wasn't ready to do that, because at the same time I was text messaging my birth mother. My birth mother didn't want to talk to me on the phone. She said she didn't want to hear my voice until she actually met me. So she would only message me through Messenger or through text messages. And those conversations they were very smooth, went fine, found out a lot of things about her that were similar to me. But with my birth father, my cousin called him and told him what was going on. And, he was, well, what does she want? Is everything okay? And all that kind of stuff. And then she called me back and said, well, I don't think he's going to call you for a few hours. She said he wasn't shocked, so he knew that you existed, but I don't think he's ready to talk. Okay. She said, give him a few days. She said, maybe 2 or 3. So I was fine with that, because at that time, again, I'm talking to my birth mother while I have her talking to my birth father. And so I said, okay, that's good. Let's just see what happens. Within 45 minutes, he called, and he and I stayed on the phone for at least 2.5 hours. And it was very cordial, very warm, very welcoming, acknowledged that he knew that I existed or that I was out there somewhere, and really just went through every ounce of family history I think he could in about 2.5 hours.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's got to be very surreal for you. How old were you when this happened?
I was 46.
So, yeah, I mean, 46 years go by, and a lot of information is coming your way within 2.5 hours.
And at that point, when you talked about the need for mental health and how it matters, I knew that I needed counseling. I knew that there was no way that I was going to be able to take in all of that information and know what to do with it, because I literally felt like I was going crazy some days. I'm like, is this really happening? What am I supposed to do? And so I was reading some books. There's some books on reunions and things you're going to feel and things you're going to go through. So then at that point, now we're preparing to meet. So it's okay, so how are we going to do that? And I found myself from January to the end of March, every other week, we had some kind of family event with one side of the family or the other. So by Sunday, Monday, I was just emotionally drained. And that's where counseling, I really believe, saved my life and kept me sane through all of it. Because you're just juggling with so much that's being thrown at you. A lot of people want to ask you questions, and you have questions, and you don't know, what fine line to cross, what not to cross. So it was a very emotional period of life. And it was also a time when I thought it was important for my girls to be in counseling too, because all these people were going to be coming in their lives as well.
What did you tell them? Like, were you as cordial with them about, you being like, that's not, your mom that you grew up with isn't their grandma biologically? How did you break it to them?
They actually found out when I think my oldest was maybe 10. 10 might have been 9. I think they might have been 9, 7, and 4 at the time. So they were cleaning up, doing their little chores, cleaning off the bookshelf. And I had a baby book, and inside the baby book was a card that says you weren't expected, you were selected. And so I always hid that because I didn't want them to find that baby book. I would put it inside of another photo album because I just never felt comfortable telling them that. And my kids ask a lot of questions, so I knew that they would be asking my parents a lot of questions, probably at the most inappropriate times. So again, constantly worrying about what everybody else was going to feel. I didn't tell them. Well, they found that book and they came in the room and they were coming to tell me that I was adopted. They didn't think that I knew because I hadn't told them. They're like, Mommy, we have something to tell you. We found out that you're adopted. Do you know how much it costs? I said, oh my. So I then had to let them know that, I did know that I was adopted, and I just chose not to tell them because I didn't want them to ask, my parents, those kind of questions like how much did she cost and things of that nature. I said, but I'll let your grandparents know. You can ask them questions if you like, but just don't do it in front of everybody. I said, there's certain times that you can talk about things and certain times you shouldn't. But those would be private conversations. I said, it's not that it's a secret. Everybody in the family knows that I'm adopted except for them.
Right. What was your mindset at that point? Like, were you embarrassed to tell them? Like, was it?
I was. Because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what they would ask me that I didn't know the answer to.
Right.
Because based on my complexion, we would always get to, well, what are you? Or what are you mixed with? What are you mixed with? And I didn't know what my race and ethnicity was. I knew that I was black, but I didn't know what I was black and mixed with what else. I had no clue, no idea.
Right.
So they knew that those kind of questions we would get about who we were and who we looked like or who we didn't look like. But I didn't know how to have that conversation with them because, again, it wasn't something that we talked about, but it wasn't something that but they did hear us talking about adoption legislation over the years. But again, they're kids, they're passing, running through rooms. I don't think that meant anything to them at the time.
Right. Yeah. One ear, not the other. And
yeah.
They just.
And even then, I in talking to my youngest daughter today, she's in her mid 20s now. Ooh. She was saying that she's now beginning to realize the impact of my finding my birth family and what it had on her. Because originally her thought was, oh, Mommy, that's your thing. She didn't think that it had anything to do with her. But as she's beginning to know what she now identifies or realizes are her biological family as well, she's seeing some of the things that we have in common and some of those, like I said, weird and quirky things. We love music. We have a lot of allergies. We love the arts. And she's starting to see those connections to the family that she now knows as our biological family.
How are your kids reacting to meeting them?
My youngest daughter, actually, she was the first one to meet a relative on my birth father's side. She was going to do something at a studio in Atlanta. She was going to see her cousin. And while she was there, she said, well, I might as well go on and meet my aunt, her great aunt. And they met, sent pictures, had a wonderful time. And ever since then, it means something different to her. And it means something different to the girls. But we met my birth mother before her church. I mentioned earlier that she was an associate pastor. She felt it was important for her to give her testimony before her church, to let her church know of some of the challenges she had at a younger age. And then she wanted to introduce herself and them to me. And that was the moment when she actually heard me speak. So for a couple of months, we had been communicating, but again, just through text messages and just through Facebook Messenger, and until we met that day in her church.
Oh, wow.
So that was crazy too.
I'm assuming the parents that you were adopted to, were they supportive of everything?
Yeah, they've been very supportive. One of the things my mother would always say, just do it. Just do it. You want to find out? Go ahead. We support you. My father would always say, we're here to support you. Whatever we need to do to support you, we're here. We had a feeling you would want to look, but, that's kind of why we talked about and let you know about legislation and the things that would change over time. In case you wanted to look without really even asking me, they would always give me the information. So we're excited for you. Well, we know that it's going to be different, but, we're here for you. And my thing, after going to some support groups, because I also went, not only was I going to counseling, I found 2 wonderful adoption support groups. And in those support groups were adoptive parents and birth parents. And I got a chance to hear, even before I met my birth parents, some of the challenges and some of the struggles that folks went through on their own reunion journey. And I got to hear different perspectives, since it wasn't just adoptees there, you got to hear from those other voices who helped me put some things into place in terms of what I was hoping for in my reunion and what I wasn't. And one of the things that I heard often was many adoptees struggle with blending those 2 families. because folks can sometimes get a little territorial. I don't want you to meet your birth family, and we're happy for you, but we're not really happy for you because we feel threatened by it. So there's just so many barriers and things that can get in the way along the journey that I asked both my adoptive and my birth parents. I said, I don't want to be one who feels like I'm torn apart. I said, I'm seeing it in my support groups that adoptees, we're just trying to put the pieces together, and yet we have family around us and friends around us telling us that everything that we're doing is wrong, or how dare you go and look for your birth parents and you had these wonderful adoptive parents. So we're battling with all this stuff. After a while, some of us will start to shut down, and I just didn't. I was just hopeful that they would understand that it meant more to me if they would do whatever they needed to do to be a part of this journey, without me feeling like that I was battling or one family was against the other family.
Right.
And they've been very supportive ever since then. And I did give them a book to read, just asking them to take a look at some of the feelings that they're going to go through. In the support group, one of the things I learned was that birth parents, when you're getting ready for a reunion, birth parents are being taken back to the time when they relinquished you. They're being taken back to that period of time in their life where whatever the struggles were, it's bringing all that stuff to the surface. But you have to also think of it, or I had to also think of it, is that it does the same for my adopted family, that whatever their struggles were with fertility or whatever the case may be, that you have to think about that part as well. Right. So trying to juggle the two and be sensitive to that and recognizing that my story is not just my story alone. It does include personal parts of their stories as well.
Was there any kind of sorrow or sadness on your biological parents that they gave you up? Or was it just like, okay, it's, it's what we did at the time and we don't regret it?
Yeah, I think with them both, and people will always ask, well, do you have siblings? And I think one of the things that my cousin that I found on DNA when we found my birth mother's site, she said, I think she thinks of her decision often. She said, if you look at some of the things that she posts, she always talks about, getting over challenges in life and struggling with some things of the past. She said, I think that your story is a part of some of the things that she posts. And when I talked to her, and you do find out that yes, they did. It wasn't just we relinquish you and now we're done and we just forget. It's something that many birth mothers struggle with for years, right. And which is a big part of because each state's legislation is different in terms of whether or not their adoption closed records can be open. But one of the things that the media will often say is that birth mothers want to remain anonymous. And in New Jersey, we actually had a few birth mothers say, we didn't sign any paperwork that said we wanted to remain anonymous. The paperwork actually says that they could be given information after they turned 18 or after they became an adult if they wanted to reconnect. So the world sometimes thinks that birth mothers want to remain anonymous, but until you talk to actual birth mothers, that's not always the case.
Right. So that you had, since you had such a great experience as far as, your adopting parents, what made you actually want to advocate?
Because at 46 years old, sitting around the table, listening to adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents talk about adoption as if it was just a regular conversation. Nobody was crying. They were able to tell you their story. They were able to tell you their struggles. Some of them had horrible reunions. But the fact that they had their reunion or were able to get information and go through counseling and go through support groups, the fact that they were in a healing place, I felt that if I could be like them, not only could I help myself, but I might be able to help somebody else who's struggling silently, because we don't talk about this. And if we don't talk about it, then it doesn't give people the freedom to find out about support groups, to ask about adopting kids, to talk about going to counseling. So it was really just important for me to figure those things out.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to create a space in our communities where we can talk about adoption without whispering. And especially in the Black community where we really don't talk about adoption. And we have a lot of kinship adoption. It's not anything that's that's new to us. It's been going on forever, but it's always been, very secretive about many of our family stories. And even that day in that legislative room during the announcement, there were maybe 90 folks in the room. There were 4 people of color. So I knew, had I not been in that room, and one of them was the guest speaker, had I not been in that room, would the information even have gotten to my community if I'm relying on the media and what they were going to put in the newspaper the next day about the legislation and what changes were made and how that impacts me as an adoptee?
Right.
So it was wanting to get to a place of healing, but also wanting to be a voice so that other adoptees knew that this law exists. And this is how you can obtain your birth records. And if you need support, these are the support groups that you can go to. If you need workshops and counseling, these are the places that you can go. I wanted to learn more about the resources to be a voice to help other people.
Right. Yeah.
Or direct people to help. Because I'm not a counselor, I'm not a case manager, but to be able to say, oh, well, did you know that Tapestry Books has nothing but adoption books? They have great materials, to do that kind of stuff.
Right. No, that's awesome. Yeah. And I think I'm sure it seems like it's super important to you to have, especially, like I said, I was going to ask you about the racial proponent of it, because there's a lot of things that go kind of under the radar in the Black community. Because you always hear, especially like in the white community, just kids going missing and the pedophilia and all that stuff. You hear it in the Spanish community, but a lot of the Black stuff doesn't really come out, even though it happens every day. 2 million kids go missing, especially Black women. Young Black girls go missing all the time. It's just not something that really is in the media. Black people don't really talk about it. It's kind of like a thing, or at least most Black people don't talk about it. And it just is there. And I was wondering how that is talked about as far as the adopting part of it. Because, it sounds stupid, but there's, sometimes you have to go by community because there's some things that get on the radar and some things don't.
Some things that don't. That's true.
And
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with that, because and like I said, folks have been adopting formally and informally for years. And a big part of working with this group, they said, well, Joy, and they're predominantly an older white group of advocates. And they said, look, we're older white people. They said, but the majority of the people who are adopting nowadays are people of color. They want to hear from voices from folks that look like them. And they said, we've been doing this for 34 years. So we're looking forward to finding some folks where we can pass the torch and say, you all, go on and continue the advocacy work that we've done. And that was their challenge to me. And in the Black community, grandma has been raising such and such's kids for years. Right. Auntie taking care of somebody else's child for years.
Mm-hmm.
Step-parent adoption. Some do it formally, some do it informally. Kinship adoption, not even kinship parent. Kinship adoption is very big in the adoption space, and that could even be a teacher. You hear about that on the media every now and then. Teachers that are adopting children that need care. So adoption is all around us. We just have to stop whispering about it and just talk about it so that people can find that community of support, because the support systems are there. And what I've learned from the older folks who are working or have worked and continue to work in the space as advocates is that the research is there, the data is there. Now it's really just bringing all these voices together. And through this pandemic, there's so many voices that have come to the surface that are talking about their adoption. So how can we bring all those pieces together so that we can help one another?
Yeah. Is it super important to you to be kind of like a role model and just be someone for, especially young Black girls to look up to? Because you look at like even something on a big scale, like when the Black Panther movie came out, so many Black people like reacted to it. It was like, oh my God, even though there's other Black superheroes, there's other Black villains and so on, but it was something different. It was like someone that looks like them. And this is a smaller scale, but a more important topic. Is it very important to you to be that kind of role model to show, like, one, is it okay? It's okay to be adopted, but also, it happens to Black women. Also, I'm sure it's big for you to just be independent and just be a strong Black woman at that. Is that something that kind of weighs on your mind of just kind of being a good representation?
It's a combination of all of that. You're starting to hear more stories about transracial adoptees. That's an adopted child of one race being raised by a family of a different race. And I think getting people to understand how they can support that child growing up in their house. Getting young Black girls to understand that, yeah, you were adopted, and whether you went through the adoption system or the foster care system, we want them to know the supports that are out there. But I think for me, it's really just all across the board. But I know that in the Black community, again, we really don't talk about adoption. So having those conversations and creating that safe space, and just taking the questions and being open enough to be able to say, okay, ask me what you want, because these are some of the things that adoptive parents are wondering what their kids are thinking, because the kids might not be talking about some of the stuff.
Right. I'm trying to figure out how I should word this question. Not that I'm trying to soften it. I'm just trying to figure out a word. Because I had a friend who was adopted, and he was adopted. He was half Black, half white, and his dad's Black, his mom's white, and he went to many different families, different colors, and so on. And I remember one family where I used to visit him a lot. He was adopted by an interracial gay couple, and of course, when you're in high school, that stuff gets out, and he's very protective, and now he's just, oh, I hate this place. And they were, really well off financially. They did really well, and they were kind of strict and so on. But the question I was trying to get to is, I don't know, is it better off for people to be adopted that look like them? Because, I think you see some of these struggles where, like, if maybe, like if you were adopted by white parents, and again, they could be great parents, but that's probably going to make you really start to think, well, clearly I don't fit in this family because I don't look like them. And again, you may be treated well, but, your mind wanders all the time, especially when you're young like that.
Right.
Do you see any, is there certain causes that really screw kids up more if they're not adopted by someone that looks like them? Like in his case, was adopted by, a gay couple?
He was adopted by, right. And I think it's a matter of whether that adoptive family is going to put in the work to educate themselves about the culture that child comes from,
right,
and educate those around them. There's a number of folks that, like I said, new voices that have popped up on social media. One young lady, a Black girl, white family, and she shares very clearly her journey and some of the things that she wishes that her family, talked about a little bit more, gave her the space to feel free to talk about and explore as it related to her culture. So, as long as folks aren't talking about this whole, well, I'm colorblind, but you can't be colorblind, because if you're raising a child of a different race, the world is going to see that. So what are you going to do to prepare them for the world that they're going into?
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it. Whether one is better than the other. If it means that a child is not going to be sitting and being bounced around from foster home to foster home, and they're going to be loved, let whoever wants to love on them. But take the responsibility, though, of educating yourself, educating the people that are around you. And if you know that you're in an environment that is not going to be welcoming to a child of color in your family or in your community, how serious are you? Are you serious enough to move to make sure that child is raised in a community that will support them a bit more, where you're going to be immersed into their culture? Because it's not just about just doing some things on one little day, or, Black History Month or Asian Awareness Month or Hispanic or Latino month that happens. You got to do more than that. You have to do more than that. You have to surround and immerse that child in folks who look like them.
Yeah. I mean, because, they'll say, like, no one can really raise a boy like his father. And so,
right.
If you are, let's say, a white family trying to adopt a Black kid, you probably need to do some research and realize
absolutely.
You're going to have to teach them what it's like to be Black, not just what it's like to be adopted kid in my white family. You have to really, one, they need to learn their culture, but two, they also need to know what it's like. It is different for them. It's not the same.
And what are some of the challenges that they're going to face in the world that they may not face as parents? How are you as the parents going to react when someone refers to them, inappropriately? And unfortunately, transracial adoptees, that's what they're called. As they become teens, folks just seem to feel that they can go and ask them whatever the heck they want. It's not questions you would normally ask the same race family, but why does it seem to be okay to go and ask the transracial adoptee, something about their parents? Because it's very clear that those are not their parents.
Right.
So it's just all those things you really should think about before you even enter. And if you have a good case manager and a good social worker before you even enter into adopting that child, that you're having those honest conversations about what are you going to do, how are you going to deal with conversations and comments. And you can't be silent about it. You can't let your child hear certain things being said about them out in the community or at events and things of that nature, and then you don't say anything. Because
Right.
what message does that send to them as well?
Right. Yeah, it's amazing that we have all these different meshes and these different communities and these groups and, couples, all these different ways of just love and just communicating, but there's so many other variables that are thrown in there. Like you said, with the interracial, the racial, transgendered couples, like it's just, there's so many more questions that are going to be asked and
Yep.
it
And you
really,
have to be ready for them.
yeah, but it could suck, especially like I said with my friend. He was in, went to school together, and you're so trying to not, you're trying to fit in as best as you can, and if you go come out and say, yeah, I'm not only am I adopted, I'm adopted by a gay couple, an interracial gay
Right.
couple. It's like
Right.
there's so many things, and it's like you're just trying to get through life and trying not to be bullied. You're trying to just graduate or just fly through the day, just get through the day, because especially now where like kids can't even go home because the bullying doesn't stop. Whereas when I was in high school, I graduated in '08, and the internet was there, but it wasn't as big as it is now. And so, it's just, I remember him being so cautious. And when someone found out about it, he thought I told, and I was like, no, man, I didn't tell. I don't care. I've been to your house. I don't
Yeah.
give a shit. But
Yeah, and that is, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's what's written in my children's book, Choosing Joy and Adoptees Journey and Finding Belonging. I talk about, and the next book is, there are lots of different ways to be a family, and I use pictures of a gay couple with a child, interracial families with a child, and I wanted to include that because those are the stories our kids are living. Those are the stories that are real life stories for adoptees. And if we can get little kids to start having these conversations and they begin to see that as normal, oh, okay, then it won't be so difficult to have those conversations. Or again, we won't have to shrink and hide ourselves or for fear of being outed, by somebody else, because that's a whole nother level of stress right there.
yeah, and you don't know how many of these kids you're saving, because there's so many of these kids that are just in these shelters and just are struggling, and it's bad enough that they don't have a family now. They're just in some place that are probably not getting the best food, and just they're being mistreated, and you could save one of these kids and they can have a really good life, or they can go down the route of, even like what you see in the Black community. You see a lot of these kids who don't have fathers and they're just killing each other, and it's horrible. And it's like, there's a lot of these lost kids that just don't have much to believe in other than these false prophecies and these people that are just leading them down the wrong, roads. And there's a lot of families, like, you gotta give credit to some of these families that are different colors and different, genders, and they're taking in these people that don't look like them, because there's a lot of risk that goes in that. There's a lot of knowledge that you need to, take in, and a lot of responsibility, more than just, like with your family, just adopting another Black person that looks like them, because you could kind of, if they didn't want to tell you, they could kind of get by saying, look,
Right.
we're related because, look, obviously, but,
Right.
and they don't have to teach you anything new for the most part. Whereas a lot of these other families, they really have to take on a journey of something they maybe, I guess if you're going to go down that route, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, but, you can't really prepare for everything. So yeah,
Yeah, and like I said, I think having those conversations with young people early, that there are a lot of different ways that we can be a family, and every family is can look different, and it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. So if we start with young people having those conversations, as they grow older, it'll just be part of their way of thinking, and they'll get away from some of the other negative thoughts about it,
right. And there's
transracial adoptees and things of that nature.
yeah, and and there's nothing worse than when you see these kids that are so lost, and doesn't matter what color they are, but when you see them, like when these kids shoot up schools and all that, like it's unfortunate, because you see, obviously mental health is a huge part of it, but parents a lot of times don't want to take credit for their kid when their kid grows up to do something stupid. But when their kid grows up to be a doctor or a lawyer, it's like, oh, I did that. That was because, we taught them right. But then when their kid does something terrible, it's like, well, it was, rap music or rock music or video games or whatever. And it's like, if parents spend a lot more time in their kids' lives and realize what they're going through, and because there's so much more kids are dealing with nowadays, There's
Oh
so much
yeah.
information that's just there for them. And, if you don't stay on them and you don't realize what they're going through, then, bad things can happen. But it's not easy for parents either, because if you tell them not to do certain things, they're probably going to go and do it. And so, again, I don't have kids, but
And that's biological or adopted.
right.
That doesn't matter at that point.
Right, exactly. And so that's why it's
Yeah.
just, it's really key to have these conversations, but also parents have to have an open mind to everything, because you go and tell your daughter, don't go out and do this and don't do that. And, now she's pregnant, and that's, what are you going to do? It's, I don't know. Like I said, you just got to have to be really ingrained in their lives, because like I said, it can go south. And I mean, look what kids are dealing with all the COVID stuff, where now they can't even go out and hang out with their friends and meet new people and date. They have to stay in their house and do homework. And that's a whole new challenge. And so I'm sure that's, like I said, it's these kids, if you don't stay on them, like, that's how some of these kids go a different direction. And it's probably, I would assume you'd agree, but it's good to have at least multiple parents in their lives or at least positive figures, even if it is a grandma and a grandpa or whatever. Just, it's probably good to have a female and a male, perspective, because, there's multiple things they can teach you. And, life is very challenging, and it seems to be getting more and more challenging as we go on.
Oh yeah, with the social media and technology and things that are even seen now on TV that we, wouldn't dare come on the screen years ago. Life is just changing. Life is changing, and things are moving at a faster pace. But I agree. You mentioned the importance of family, the importance of the extended family, whether that's bringing in your friend down the street or another relative to be a voice in that child's ear.
Right.
And people are looking to belong to things. They're looking to be loved. They're looking to be nurtured and cared for. But another piece that you mentioned was about being educated, making sure that people are learning all these different things as well.
Yeah, there's just so many, and you got to just let them be aware of all the traps that are out there. Like you just, I promote my podcast on Instagram, but every time I look on there, it's just some girl moving her ass, and it's just like, it's like girls believe that, and they can make money off of that, but it's like girls are just thinking that they have to just sell their body to, make a living and to get attention because they are beautiful. It's like, be fortunate that you have beauty, and there's nothing wrong with going out and doing something, modeling or something, but when you go out there, like, and your whole goal is to just show your body just to get attention, to make money, it's like, it's not where you want your daughter. And again, where you don't want your daughter to be, but there's a lot of traps. Like I said, social media and the internet and everything is so complicated. It's not just this, hey, there's a couple, you're 2 clicks away from being in something terrible.
Yeah, and that stuff doesn't go away.
No.
Even if you think you deleted it, it did not get deleted.
No, exactly.
Yeah, those are some of the conversations we have with our kids in school too, about the use of technology.
Yeah, we're being responsible.
How you're really branding yourself for the future. And you have to be careful with what you post, careful with what you share.
Yeah, because you could say something, and one of the things that we are in this cancel culture and all that, context doesn't really matter anymore. So like, if you say something, even if it's joking, it could be racial, whatever it can be, and if it's in context of a joke, it doesn't matter, because comedians are getting canceled. So and it's in the form of a joke. Now, there's some comedians that doesn't seem to be canceled because they're uncancelable. Like Dave Chappelle doesn't seem to care, which good for him. But it's like some people, if you're that big, you probably will be okay. But some of these, mid-tier, they're going to constantly get in trouble because, of some text or some tweet they put out 10 years ago.
Years ago, yeah. We see that happening.
Yeah, and so if you're some, like in your case, one of your kids who are doing okay in life, but they're a nobody in comparison to Dave Chappelle, what are you supposed to do? Like you that can cost you a job, because jobs are looking into people's social medias, and they even want people's passwords and things. Which I don't know necessarily is right, but that's what they're doing.
That's what they're doing. And even the colleges nowadays, they're checking you out before you come into school.
Right.
Especially athletes. That's what we tell our athletes. They're going to want to see your social media. So I suggest you start cleaning it up now.
Yeah.
And don't think they won't find that fake account.
Oh yeah, that was a big thing with like the basketball player Kevin Durant. He had like a fake account where he would just like defend himself, And
Rant, yeah,
it was just
yeah,
like, okay, what do you do? It was just weird, but it was like, dude, you don't really need to do this. You're such a big player and such a great guy, like great player. Like, why do you care about this stuff? Um, but yeah, those are kind of all the traps that are in there. And that's why I'm getting back to what we were originally talking about, just being adopted. I'm sure, having good parents who adopt you or being good role models to kind of, because if you just, especially being adopted, and if they know it, you have to stay on them and let them know that, like, hey, like I said, there's so many traps out there, and one false move and God knows where you end up. And that's kind of, everything is, there's landmines all around you.
yeah, that's true. And that all goes back to good parenting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get out of here, is there any like misconceptions and things that you want people to know about just adopting or just being adopted?
Being adopted, we struggle with identity. We struggle with fears of abandonment. There's a shame that comes along with it. But I think to get over that, or to if we begin to educate people, and if we begin to share a little bit about trauma experiences, and if we share about some information about brain research that helps people realize that some of the issues we may have as adoptees are just a part of being adopted, and some of the things that come along with being adopted and can be overcome, and that counseling is important, that support groups help, and that there's tons of resources that are out and available for the adoptive, for the birth family, and for the adoptee. And that, again, my goal is that I'm hoping we normalize the conversation so people can stop whispering. And when people can stop whispering, other people will begin to find their community where they'll get their support along the way.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're an awesome person. You're like a very beautiful soul. You seem to be on the right track, and I'm happy that everything worked out for you with your family. And if you ever need anything from me, please just reach out. And like I said, hope we can keep in touch. I will promote your books when the episode comes out. I'll put the links in there.
Okay.
But yeah, anything you need, like I said, I'm just happy that I got to meet you. And like I said, you're an awesome person.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I love one of your messages, which was don't give up, keep fighting through adversity. And that's the same thing we do as adoptees on a day-to-day basis. And I know you mention that quite often.
Yeah. When you nearly see death, as I did, it kind of puts it into perspective of, it can end tomorrow. So you might as well try to make the best of it and just keep fighting, because there's a lot of people. And I'm sure you see this in with the being adopted. I'm sure there's a lot of people that just feel alone, and there's no one like them, especially with the stigma that's put on them that, oh, you're adopted. It's like, oh, well, you don't want to tell people, so that's why it probably doesn't get out there as much. And so people with disabilities, even though there's, I don't know how many, but I know there's at least thousands of people with visually impairment or blindness. And there's plenty of us, all of us at one point have felt like we're alone, even though there's plenty of people out there running around with canes and dogs and, and whatever else. And we're not alone. It's just, there's a lot of, even what we were talking about with the racial tensions and all, there's so much smoke in between that it's hard to reach those people nowadays, even though you think it's easier because of the internet, but there's so much bullshit in the middle. And, you just got to continue to fight and push and know that there's other people out there that are struggling just like you, regardless of whatever your color is, your gender, what your mission is. Like I said, we have similar missions, but it's two different things in some ways, but it's still all about helping people and trying to, just put information out there. And, it's just don't give up.
Yeah. Continue advocating for those communities that where folks don't have a voice. I think that's our common theme right there.
Yep, there you go. Thank you again. I appreciate you doing this.
You're welcome.
We'll talk soon, and please take care of yourself.
Okay, take care, Timothy.
All right, bye.
All right.
She called me Timothy. I feel like an adult as I act like a child. She was great. I say that about everybody, but I find great guests. I guess that's a skill of mine. Like I said, it was a different topic. I don't know. I love things that I didn't even think about this. I just saw her on Podmatch and I was like, okay, I'll reach out to her and what a good woman. What a delightful conversation that was. Okay. I heard people talking and I was wondering if it was her on the phone or something else, but it's just someone outside. So I'm not going crazy. Yeah, guys, I hope all is well for everyone. Hang in there. Still battling my mental health. Been kicking my ass. Been off and on in a weird place. I bought these new multivitamins. This is my mental health check of the episode. These multivitamins, they're called, what is it, Garden of Life? Yeah, Garden of Life. I gotta take them 4 times a day. It's got like everything. It's a mixture of all these vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin B. Like it's called like a vitamin B mixture or something because it's got like B12 and B3 and B all this other crap. So we'll see how that works. I'm only on my 2nd day, so it's hard to say if it's really working or not. And I'm also back on my medication, so there's that. But yeah, I've been a mess lately. So, not many people have checked on me, but hey, what are you gonna do? I'm sure when this episode comes out, people, oh my God, we didn't know. Okay. But yeah, I hope all is well. Like I said, please everybody take care of yourselves. Check on the people that care about you, and you never know who's struggling out there, regardless of mental health or not, physical problem, whatever it is. Maybe they're dealing with a financial problem. I don't know. Just check on them. Love up your animals, which is something I haven't said because I'm a big animal person. Love your animals up. Don't abuse them. I hate you people if you abuse your animals. Yeah, and I think we can get out of here. Oh, I'm looking into getting like music and stuff for this. Royalty free, as it's called. I'm looking at that. We'll see. It's going to happen. I just got to figure out the right mixture of like an intro and an outro song and all that. So that's another update. But yeah, guys, thank you for all the support. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, and all that. If there's anybody that can help, please just, share with them. Trying to keep people alive. If there's anybody who hears this and wants to be a guest, please reach out to me at my blurred opinion on what do you call it, on Instagram, and just look at TJ West and just put Williamsport in Facebook. I should come up. But yeah, just get a hold of me, and I'm out there. It's not hard even to get on my Facebook. I have my numbers on there. I don't give a fuck. My number is 267-574-4529. I don't care if I get my number. Somebody stalks me, what are you going to do? Is what it is. I don't hide from people. I'm just trying to help people. So if somebody wants to be a guest, that's my number. If you just need a friend, someone to talk to, I will try my best. And I will see you guys in the next one. All right, guys. Bye.